Good evening and welcome back to Empty Cloud Monastery. My name is Bhante Sudaso and this is the weekly monk chat session, the opportunity to ask questions about Buddhism without any limit on topics, so anything related to Buddhism is acceptable. And I see there's already a few questions typed in, so I'll start with homage to the Buddha and then I'll start going through the questions. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang namassami. And hello to the people checking in online. Hello to Kevin, Maria, Rick, Joseph, Manol, John, and everyone else who's watching. And first question here is from Kevin. Kevin says, what exactly is passaddhi and how does it differ from actual samadhi? Well, passaddhi is a more general term for tranquility or serenity. And passaddhi, in the suttas, it normally talks about two kinds of passaddhi. So there's bodily passaddhi and mental passaddhi. So physical tranquility or serenity and mental tranquility, mental serenity. And so this is just talking about peacefulness and stillness of body and mind. Or when the body is moving, then to do so in a peaceful way, a relaxed way, a way which is not agitated or disturbed. And also having a mind which is peaceful, not agitated or disturbed. So passaddhi is a more general quality of activity and quality of mind, which one can cultivate in any activity and all day long. So constantly developing an attitude of serenity, of peacefulness, and using our body in a way which supports serenity and peacefulness, and minimizing unnecessary movements of body and mind, not just during meditation practice, but actually throughout the day, minimizing movements of body and mind. So samadhi, on the other hand, samadhi more precisely means collectedness or unification. And it's referring to the unification of mind, particularly during meditation practice. So one can develop a certain degree of samadhi during activity, but samadhi is a quality which is particularly developed when the body and mind are completely still. So the development of samadhi does rely upon passaddhi. There needs to already be a certain amount of serenity and tranquility of body and mind in order for samadhi to be possible. So passaddhi is a requisite for samadhi. But passaddhi in and of itself is again quite an ordinary everyday quality of experience that we can cultivate at all times. Whereas again, samadhi is the more refined, unified alertness and stillness of body and mind that we develop during meditation practice. And next we have a question from Joseph. So Joseph is asking, have any of you experienced grief or heartbreak? How did it feel and how did the practice of Dhamma help you through it? Thinking of Venerable Ananda grieving the death of Venerable Sariputta. Heartbreak, not that I can recall. Grief, I mean, I lost my father when I was 20 years old. So that was a relatively strong emotional experience. And actually what I remember helped enormously was mindfulness of the body. Just focusing on being clearly aware of my body's sensations. And it made it easier for me to impartially observe the emotional experiences that were moving through the mind without getting swept up in them so easily. And there's another question here from John. John says, when a train of thought regarding the past comes up that brings dosa with it, how to cut it off skillfully so it doesn't affect me? Well, actually, again, mindfulness of the body can be really helpful if you just keep coming back to focusing on your body sensations, then you won't get swept up in thoughts in the first place. When you do notice that you're getting caught up in aversion about a memory of the past, it can be helpful also just to remind yourself, like, oh, that's the past. It's over. It's not my current experience. Just reminding yourselves that it's just a memory. It has no power over you unless you give it power over you. It can also be helpful to focus on the dosa itself, so that quality of aversion or aversiveness in the mind, noticing how that aversiveness itself feels uncomfortable. And let it relax and settle down. Let the mind become gentle again, and then notice how more comfortable it is when the mind is gentle instead of aversive. That also can help to pull the mind out of that aversive condition. Also, directing your attention towards joyful recollections or joyful perceptions in the present moment are also helpful. The practice of loving kindness is a great way of doing this. Recollection of one's own goodness is another powerful way of resetting the mind to a more joyful condition. Recollecting Buddha, Dhamma, and Sangha also can be really helpful. So these are all things which can be quite useful. And John further asks, why is it that on some days I feel crushed by the past, whereas on other days it barely affects me at all? Well, that's for something for you to investigate. So when you feel crushed by the past, look at what's going on in your mind. There's some mental activity which is generating that experience. There's some reactivity to thoughts of the past or memories or something, which is making the mind feel overwhelmed or crushed. And then when the mind is not so affected by the past, well, again, look at that. Why is that? Examine your own experience. Is there a more wholesome relationship with the past, which is making it so it doesn't damage your present moment peace of mind? So generally speaking, when the mind is full of unwholesome traits, then it suffers. When the mind is full of wholesome traits, then it is joyful. So that's usually the difference that we can notice. When we're engaging in any kind of defiled mental activity, then we suffer. When we don't engage in defiled mental activity, then we don't suffer. And when we engage in wholesome mental activity, then we're joyful. So this is the correlation that we can normally observe in our own mind. Okay, and hello to Kema and Kim. Good to see both of you as well. And Hasanta says, is there any evidence of the one lifetime explanation of Paticca Samuppada in EBT? Or is it always explained in the 3 lifetime approach, please? I would actually put this the other way, which is there any evidence for the 3 lifetime interpretation in the EBTs, or is that just commentarial? And the answer is that it's just commentarial. There's no support for the 3 lifetime interpretation. You've got to really stretch how the Buddha talks about Paticca Samuppada to make it the 3 lifetime interpretation. So it does kind of work, but it requires that one ignore a few parts in the suttas where the Buddha is clearly talking about an immediate present moment experience. Observation of the chain of causality happening on a moment by moment basis. So actually the clearest explanation that I've come across is from my own preceptor, Ajahn Pasano, who said that Paticca Samuppada demonstrates scale invariance. Which means that it applies equally well on all time scales. So if you're looking at one moment, you see Paticca Samuppada. If you look at one day, you see Paticca Samuppada. You look at one lifetime, you see Paticca Samuppada. You look at multiple lifetimes, you see Paticca Samuppada. So no matter what scale you look at, you still see the exact same causal sequence playing out. Kind of like a fractal. One of the characteristics of fractals is that no matter what scale you look at it from, you see the same patterns repeating themselves. Whether it's very tiny or very large, you see exactly the same pattern. So it's the same with dependent origination. You see the exact same causal pattern on every scale of experience, from the smallest to the biggest. Okay, and Julie says, are there situations that happen to test one before they ordain? For example, romantic relationships or other examples. Mara's presence before ordaining. There are many, many examples of this. It's actually very common. It's very common that someone is like, oh, I want to be a monk, and then they meet that dream person who they've always imagined who couldn't possibly be real, and then that person comes into their life, and it's like, maybe I don't want to be a monk after all. Maybe that can wait till next lifetime. That's very common. Or other things come up, family emergencies, or problems with your finances, or problems with your friends, or there's something. And yeah, that's a real test of your resolve. Because if you really want to be a monk, nothing will stop you. Nothing will stop you. Nothing. Doesn't matter how strong it seems to be. If you are firmly resolved on monastic life, nothing will stop you. Not even meeting your dream person. That's not going to stop you. You'll just be like, sorry, buddy, not this life. Sorry, I was good in past lives, but this time around we're doing something a bit different. Well, that's okay. Or some family emergency comes up and you're just like, well, I'm still going to be a monk. That's not going to delay things. I'll just find a way to be there for my family without getting in the way of my monastic life. Or something going on with your finances, well, you find a way to make it work. So if you're resolute on becoming a monastic, nothing will stop you. And if something is stopping you, then that means your resolve is clearly not particularly strong. The people I know who are really resolved on being monks, nothing stops them. They just point their mind towards that goal and they don't stop. So the people who make excuses for not getting ordained, they're just excuses. That's all it is. They're just justifying their lack of resolution, their lack of determination. It's extremely rare that somebody actually doesn't become ordained for genuine obstacles. That's quite rare. It's almost always a lack of determination that causes it. And there's also a lot of people who they have this story in their mind of like, if I'm a good Buddhist, that means I have to be a monk. But they actually don't really want to be a monk. So there's this kind of inner conflict between the fact that they don't actually want to be a monk, but they have this story that they should be. And that actually creates a lot of suffering until eventually they just come to grips with the fact that they don't actually want to be a monk. And then they usually settle down and things get much easier from that point onwards. And Nikhil asks, how do we correlate anicca, dukkha, and anatta in our day-to-day life? Well, of those three, anicca and dukkha are the most easy and the most obvious. So anicca, observe change. Observe how everything in your life is constantly changing. All your sensations are constantly changing. Your experiences are constantly changing. Your perceptions are constantly changing. Your thoughts are constantly changing. Your mental state is constantly changing. Everything in your experience is constantly changing. That's anicca. Dukkha, everything is unsatisfying. This again is usually really, really obvious. You have this story in your mind of the world's best cookie, and then you go and you eat the cookie, and it's just not that great. And you're like, but it seemed like it was going to be so great in my imagination. But the actual experience was just a little bit unsatisfying. That's dukkha. Or your body is feeling a little bit achy today. That's dukkha. Your friend's a little bit rude. That's dukkha. Just look at your experience. Actually, every single moment there's this little awkwardness in the mind. A little kind of itchiness in the mind. Achiness in the mind. That's dukkha. It's always there. It only goes away for brief periods of time when you're in very strong samadhi during meditation. Then your dukkha can sometimes disappear for periods of time. And it only goes away permanently with full awakening. But the rest of the time, there's always this background ache in the mind. This subtle, persistent discomfort, unease in the mind. That's dukkha. Pay attention to it. It's always there. Sometimes it's strong, sometimes it's relatively mild, but it's always there. And if you start watching for it, then you'll see it. And interestingly enough, the more clearly you observe dukkha, the less it bothers you. You can start to discover that there's a place of serenity and joy, which is also aware of dukkha. And the third one, anatta, so the impersonal quality of things. This one's a little bit more challenging, but one way to approach it is to view the causal nature of experience. So for example, when you go outside for a walk in the park and it starts raining, well, that's just nature. That's just natural cause and effect. It's not personal. It's not that the devas hate you in particular. It's not like the sky devas wanted to ruin your nature walk. It's just that it was the right time for it to rain. And maybe the devas also do hate you. That's also possible. But it was just the right time for it to rain, so it rained. There's nothing personal about it. And this is the same for everything else. So your body aches, well, there's nothing personal about it. That's just what bodies do. Your friend is being rude to you, well, there's nothing personal. That's just what people do. It's just what defiled, unawakened people do. So just view everything in your life as a manifestation of natural cause and effect. And don't take anything personally. And this will be the first glimpse of anatta. There's deeper ways. So another one is to start to examine your self-identity. Start listing all the things that you think of as me. I am this, I am that. And then examine to see, is that actually 100% universally always true? Like maybe you say, I am angry. Well, are you always angry all the time and nothing else? You're like, well, no. I'm only angry once in a while, actually. Well, then clearly you're not angry. That's just a temporary experience. Therefore, it's impersonal. It's not who you are. So you can go through every single self-identity in this way and recognize that it's not actually permanently, eternally you. It's always just a temporary experience. Therefore, it's impersonal. It's anatta. And Alysia says, how can we teach Buddhist ideals to other people without offending them? Well, Alysia, I usually recommend not trying. So what's usually much more effective is to model ideal Buddhist conduct. You don't even need to explain to people what you're doing. Just be generous, be kind, be patient, be tolerant, be happy, be peaceful. And maybe at some point people will ask, oh, what is it about you? And then you can say, oh, I've been training my mind through Buddhist practice. I've been training my mind to be more happy and kind and peaceful and generous and so on. But generally speaking, just model Buddhist behavior, good Buddhist behavior. And that's what will actually tend to get through to people. And if people ask you to explain Buddhism to them, well, the best thing to do is actually to point them to Buddhist monks. Point them to Buddhist monks who can teach them the Dhamma. Unless you're really, really confident in the depth and clarity of your understanding of Buddhism, it may not be a good idea to try to explain it to other people. You can maybe explain some basic principles, but even then you have to be very careful because you don't want to spread misinformation. I remember when I was first getting into Buddhism, the first couple years, I thought I knew Buddhism a lot better than I actually did. And I told some people things which at the time I thought were accurate, and I later realized actually weren't true, weren't correct. And I wish I could go back and fix that and tell them, no, actually what I said wasn't an accurate representation of the Buddha Dhamma. So it's usually better to refer people to good Buddhist monks who can teach them the Dhamma, unless you're really, really confident that you really do know the Dhamma well enough to explain it. And Norma says, I cut myself 3 times this week, small cuts. I thought karma, relieved I didn't cut worse. I have been consciously purifying many poisons. Can I look at this as progress? I don't know what you mean by consciously purifying poisons, so you'd have to explain that in more detail. But it is true that everything we experience in our life is the result of past karma. So that also includes things like accidents and illness and so on. So this is quite clearly explained in a few places in the suttas. So sometimes it's just the result of our own negligence. But usually it is in fact the result of past karma of some degree. Yeah, and one way of relating to it is to reflect that once we experience the consequence of some past bad karma, then that past bad karma is now used up, which means it can't harm us anymore. So there's actually some reason to be happy when bad things happen to us, because it's like, oh great, that's one less chunk of bad karma that I need to worry about. And make lots of good karma, and then you'll have more good fortune in the future. Okay. And Kema says, I often get really upset when, especially highly esteemed and popular, teachers say that which I consider goes against foundational teachings of the Buddha, and yet call it Buddhism/Dhamma. Part of the trigger is believing they're contributing to the already rapidly accelerating deterioration of the Dhamma in the world. How can I work on letting this go? Well, first off, it's important to recognize that this outrage is coming from a very wholesome place. So there's an appreciation of genuine Buddha Dhamma, a recognition of the value of genuine Buddha Dhamma, and the wish for genuine Buddha Dhamma to persist in the world and to be accessible. That's all very wholesome, that's all very good. However, it's important to also recognize that the world is full of delusional people, and unfortunately, many of those people think that they're Buddhist teachers. So there is a lot of wrong view being taught by people that they call Buddhism, but it's actually just wrong view. There's a lot of that out there. And I don't see that stopping anytime soon. It's actually been going on since the time of the Buddha. It's nothing new, and it's not going to go away anytime soon. So to some degree, we just need to come to peace with the fact that there will always be wrong Dhamma being taught in the world. There will always be bad teachers teaching wrong view and calling it Buddhism. That is not going to go away. So we just accept this is the reality of things, and we commit ourselves to studying and practicing genuine Buddha Dhamma, and when the time is right, to sharing genuine Buddha Dhamma with other people. So we just do our part to uphold genuine Buddha Dhamma, and try not to worry about the damage that other people are doing. Just focus on what you can do to practice and maintain the genuine Buddha Dhamma. And the other thing also is sometimes with, again, teachers who are teaching wrong Dhamma, sometimes they're also teaching some genuine correct Dhamma mixed in there as well. So we can also appreciate the good things that they're saying while also identifying the harmful things, the inaccurate things. And we can still appreciate the good things, but not fall into the error of adopting their wrong views. By the way, this also means that we need to be very careful with recommending teachers to other people. Because if you say like, oh, I really like so-and-so, they're a great teacher, and then it turns out so-and-so is actually teaching some wrong view, well, now you've just put yourself in the position of encouraging other people to follow wrong Dhamma. So it's important to be very careful about recommending a teacher to another person unless you really know for sure that that teacher is exclusively teaching genuine Buddha Dhamma. And Rick says, lab results indicate that one of my chronic illnesses has gotten worse. What are skillful ways to practice with grief due to the body breaking down because of illness? What are ways to be at peace as we face the possibility that we may no longer be able to maintain the life we have created? Well, Rick, this is the inevitability of being born. Birth inevitably brings with it aging, sickness, and death. So decay and death are inevitable. And the Buddha said every single day we need to constantly remind ourselves of this. I am of the nature to decay. I am not exempt from decay. I am of the nature to sickness. I am not exempt from sickness. I am of the nature to die. I am not exempt from dying. We need to remind ourselves of this every day. This is natural. It's normal. There's absolutely nothing wrong with it. Rick, there is nothing wrong with your body at all. There's nothing wrong with your health at all. Your body is doing exactly what it's supposed to do, which is to fall apart and die. That's what bodies are supposed to do. It's expressing its nature perfectly. Your job is to come to terms with that. Come to peace with that. Yes, your body will never be as healthy and strong as it was when it was young. That's true. That is a perfect expression of nature. There's absolutely nothing wrong with your body. It is doing exactly what it is naturally supposed to do. The problem is that you expect it to be otherwise. If you expect your body to be young, strong, and healthy forever, that is foolishness and it will make you suffer. If you expect your body to get weak, decay, and die, well, you will get exactly what you're expecting because that's how nature works. This is why the Buddha said we need to constantly remind ourselves of these facts. Because the mind very easily slips into this delusion of eternal youth, eternal strength, eternal health, eternal life. Even though it's the direct opposite of everything that our senses perceive. Norma says, a little dukkha keeps you alert. Facts, this is true. Okay, Anna Maria says, last week Bhante Wade mentioned a form of meditation helpful for greedy types called Shoba. Probably Asuba is probably what he was saying. Or something similar. Can you please explain if you know what I'm talking about? Yeah, he's probably talking about Asuba. So the word Asuba literally means non-beauty. There's many ways of practicing Asuba. And it's one of the categories of meditation practice which is usually recommended to be done under direct guidance of a teacher. Again, ideally a monk who has a lot of experience with this style of practice. Because if Asuba meditation is done incorrectly, you can actually wind up inflaming your defilements. In particular, it can tend to make the mind very grumpy, aversive, hostile, if it's not done correctly. But briefly speaking, Asuba practice is the practice of viewing everything as non-beautiful, not beautiful. And this does not mean viewing it as ugly. So Asuba practice is often misrepresented as being the practice of viewing everything as repulsive or disgusting. But that's actually not correct. That will just train the mind in dosa, in aversion. So Asuba is teaching the mind to view everything as not beautiful. Not beautiful, but also not ugly. It just is what it is. So it's kind of like when you're looking at, say, a slug. Well, a slug is just a slug. To our eyes, it's not beautiful and it's not ugly. It just is what it is. Or a snail, or a squirrel. It just is what it is. It's not beautiful or ugly. To another squirrel might look at it and be like, oh wow, that one's really handsome. And then they look at a different squirrel and they're like, not that one so much. The whiskers are a little too big. But to our eyes, they're just squirrels. And realistically, that's probably how squirrels look at humans. It's how snails and slugs look at humans. They look at us and we all just look kind of the same to them. They can't tell the difference between beautiful humans and ugly humans. We just all look pretty much the same. So training the mind in that way, to just see everything as just being an expression of nature. A perfect expression of things as they actually are. There's nothing beautiful and nothing ugly. There's just reality as it is. And reality is just expressing the mechanistic clockwork of the universe. It's just expressing the unrelenting sequence of causality. It's not beautiful, it's not ugly, it's just the way it is. This is Asuba meditation. And there's many ways of practicing it, but again, it's important to have direct guidance from an experienced monk if you're going to get into Asuba meditation. Some of the more direct ways of dealing with the greedy tendencies, one which is really helpful is to just look at the feeling of desire. So normally when we're full of desire, we focus on the object that we want. Well, instead, focus on the feeling of wanting. Focus on the feeling of desire itself. And you'll notice that desire itself is really painful. It's really unpleasant. And as you notice that, you'll naturally stop. You'll naturally lose interest. And Alysia says, what prayer do you recommend when using mala beads for someone who is new to Buddhism? I don't recommend mala beads, and I don't recommend prayers with mala beads. That's a practice which is common in some Buddhist traditions, but not all. So I personally don't use mala beads. I have experimented with them a bit in the past, but it just never really clicked with me. So I honestly don't recommend it. I recommend mindfulness of the body. I recommend loving kindness meditation. If you want to do chanting, I recommend doing traditional Buddhist chanting. But I don't personally have much experience with mala beads, so I don't really talk about it. Yeah, it's not something I ever found very useful for myself. And Robert says, do you think stream entry for a serious lay practitioner is a reasonable and attainable goal? Yes, I do. But you need to be serious about it. Follow the 5 precepts diligently. Practice meditation every day. Practice generosity. This is really important. Especially for Westerners. Westerners just tend to be really stingy. And actually I've met a lot of Western Buddhists who just never quite seem to understand that generosity actually is a really important part of Buddhist practice. So they go to lots of retreats and they do lots of meditation, but they're really stingy, self-centered jerks. And it's like, well, of course you're not going to get even close to stream entry with that kind of attitude. Practice generosity and kindness. It's not just about doing a bunch of meditation. It's also about changing your behaviors. Developing behaviors which are kind and peaceful and selfless. And that will start transforming the heart as well. So yeah, if one is practicing seriously, practicing generosity and kindness, following the 5 precepts, studying the suttas, doing lots of meditation, discussing the Dhamma with experienced monks, then yeah, stream entry is reasonable as a goal for lay people. Yeah. Okay. Mark says, in several Hindu religions as well as modern spiritual paths, the concept of vibrations is often spoken of referring to people as well as other dimensions. Do Buddhist suttas ever mention this? No, they don't. Kema says, can you please share about great monastics who have dealt with and perhaps overcome illness through the practice? Actually, my own preceptor is an example of this. He had malaria at least 4 times that I'm aware of. One of them was very severe. One time he was hospitalized. He was so sick he was hospitalized and it looked like he might not survive. And there's actually a cute story about this. So my preceptor was in a hospital in Bangkok and again looked like he might not survive. He might not live through it. And his teacher, Ajahn Chah, came to visit him in the hospital. And Ajahn Pasano was very, very excited, very happy that his teacher was coming to see him. And Ajahn Chah walked in the hospital room and said to him, either you'll get better or you'll die. And he walked out of the room. That was it. But actually my preceptor, Ajahn Pasano, he said that this was a really powerful lesson. Because I was recognizing like, oh yeah, that is how it goes. Either you get better or you die. And we just come to full peace with that fact. and with full peace, full acceptance of that fact, then it no longer obsesses the mind. It no longer disturbs the mind. John says, many feel that kindness is a kind of failing, not a virtue. They say it enables others to be weak and it involves a lack of accountability. What is your reply to this way of seeing it? I would say that people like to justify being selfish. That's what I would say. And people who like to be selfish will find any way they can to justify being selfish. That's what I say to that. And the cultivation of kindness brings peace and joy to one's own heart. Whether other people appreciate it or not, it brings peace and joy to your own heart. Whether other people try to take advantage of you or not, it brings peace and joy to your own heart. And of course, it cultivates good karma. And the Buddha is quite clear that a basis of mundane good karma is a powerful support to one's spiritual practice. So it's not to be overlooked. And Nikhil says, what is experiencing the experience of neither sensation nor no sensation? I assume you're talking about Nevasanya na sanya, which is the fourth of the non-physical or incorporeal samadhi states of meditative concentration, which are beyond the four ordinary jhanas. So in the standard list of 8 samadhi states, this is the highest, it's the most difficult, it's the most remote. The vast majority of people, even skilled meditators, will never experience this in their life. And there's also many places in the suttas where it doesn't seem necessary to reach that stage of samadhi in order to attain awakening. It does seem to be necessary to have some level of jhana to attain awakening, but it does not seem to be necessary to attain the incorporeal samadhi states. So I recommend, Nikhil, rather than trying to form some intellectual concept of the highest of the incorporeal samadhi states, instead you should focus on what can you actually practice in your daily life. Practice generosity, practice kindness, practice self-restraint, practice mindfulness of the body. Practice the recognition of impermanence. This is what's actually going to do you good. Trying to get some concept of the experience of neither perception nor non-perception, that's just not going to help you at all. It's not useful at all. So just don't waste your time. Focus on doing the practices that you can do. And Joseph says, have you shared a video already on the Dvaita Vitakka Sutta? Many times, actually. It's a classic sutta and one of my favorites. I've spoken about it many times. So if you look at the history on our YouTube channel, you should be able to find past talks on that particular sutta. And Kim says, what types of determinations have you done for the rains? It seems like monastics already practice austerity to the max. Well, Kim, there's a whole range of monks and a whole range of levels of austerity, levels of renunciation. So saying that monks practice austerity to the max by default is a bit of a stretch. It's not the case. There's a pretty wide range among monks. I actually haven't made any specific determinations for this particular vasa. Just following the regular schedule and doing my regular practices. So sometimes I have made specific determinations, but this particular vasa I haven't. Yeah. And Alysia says, what chant would you recommend for me and what language should I chant? Well, if you want to learn some traditional Buddhist chanting, a great one to do is the recollection of Buddha, Dhamma, and Sangha in the Pali language, which it starts with the phrase Itipiso Bhagava. And it's a list of qualities of the Buddha, Dhamma, and Sangha. And this is a very old chant. It's from the time of the Buddha. It's one of the chants which the Buddha himself recommended. And it's one of the most commonly recited chants in the Theravada Buddhist world. So that's what I would recommend. And James says, I've heard that there is no wisdom without jhana, there is no jhana without wisdom. Your thoughts? Yeah, so this is a reference to a Dhammapada verse. Let's see. Nati jhana panyasa, nati panyang ajayato, which means there is no jhana for those who lack wisdom, and there is no wisdom for those who lack jhana. And then it goes on in Pali. Oh, I forget the exact wording in Pali. I'd have to look it up. But it means one who has both wisdom and jhana is close to nibbana, close to full awakening. So, in many places in the suttas, the Buddha talks about the relationship between samadhi practice and wisdom. And he makes it quite clear that developing strong samadhi is necessary for developing deep wisdom. And that without strong samadhi, in particular, without developing jhana, then one's wisdom will never become deep, will never become strong, will never become transcendent. So that verse that you quoted, the Dhammapada verse that you quoted, is a short, direct statement on the matter. But it comes up in many places throughout the suttas. So it's quite clear, again, without developing strong samadhi, jhana level samadhi, then one's wisdom practice will always be shallow and always be weak. But when one develops strong samadhi, then it's possible to develop deep wisdom. And when one has developed both strong samadhi and deep wisdom, then one is close to awakening. Which again is how that Dhammapada verse concludes. And that's the last question online. So if no other questions appear in the next couple seconds, then we'll go ahead and conclude the session at this time. Okay. And Nikhil says, if someone wants to attain arhatship, then there's what looks like a string of characters in Devanagari. So Nikhil, if you can write that in Roman letters, that would be much easier for me to read. So I don't actually read Devanagari script. I might learn it at some point in the future, but for now I don't read it. So Nikhil, if you can say your question in Roman letters, then I will do my best to answer. And Rick says, when bringing meditation into daily life, how much should we keep the focus on the body versus on what is happening around us? These are not two separate things. So paying attention to your body does not mean that then you ignore the rest of your experience. And being aware of your experience does not mean that you ignore your body. These are not two separate things. So it starts with the foundation of clear awareness of your body. And based on that clear awareness of your body, you also cultivate a sharp awareness of the rest of your sensory fields. But it's always anchored in the body. It's always anchored in body experience. Oh, okay. Nikhil clarified. Nikhil was asking, if someone wants to attain arhatship, then Nirodha Samapati will be helpful. Nikhil, you're shooting way above your pay grade, as they say. You're nowhere near Nirodha Samapati. It's not even worth thinking about. There is such a thing, but you're nowhere near. Don't go there. Don't waste your time. Practice generosity, practice kindness, practice mindfulness of the body. Cultivate the recognition of impermanence. If you have the karmic conditions for Nirodha Samapati, then you'll get there eventually anyway. And don't worry about becoming an arhat. Focus on becoming a stream enterer. You have to do step 1 before you can do step 4. So don't be so focused on step 4. Focus on step 1. You can get there. You can get there, but you have to do it one step at a time. So focus on the next step. Don't worry so much about a step that's not going to happen anytime soon. Though I appreciate your enthusiasm. It's very inspiring. And that looks like the last question now. So if nothing else appears, then we can go ahead and conclude. And that looks like it for the evening. So we'll go ahead and wrap up the session at this time with 3 more sadhus. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. And we'll see you all next time.